Good morning, I'm WaywornWyrm, and welcome to my channel, and welcome to episode 5 of the Pugilist, Interrogation. Arthur moved up in his bed and looked at Detective Kane. Okay, so let's have this conversation. Barbara opened up her notebook and took out a pen. Yes, let's. Let me just start by pointing out what I have on you. Violating the MORE Act. That is a slam dunk. You were found wearing a mask. Obviously injured from a fight. Your hands have bruising consistent with fighting. It is not going to be a hard case at all to get you for at least that. Then there are several counts of vigilantism. Many counts of assault, obstruction of justice, giving a false police report. In fact, giving many false police reports. Any decent prosecutor could argue premeditation on all of those counts because the mask you were found wearing is the same mask I saw in your house when we last spoke. That doesn't even mention your bullet-resistant vest. And given your history as an MMA fighter, you can bet your sweet ass that the same prosecutor who argues premeditation will argue that your fighting skills deserve to bump the assault charges up to assault with a deadly weapon. I know that's usually just a movie thing, but I promise you, it can happen. Your lawyer's tactic will probably be a self-defense case. And in the first case, the one where you filed the police report for that count of vigilantism, for those 4 counts of assault, that's an argument that might hold some weight. But in the others, where you went looking for trouble, where you obstructed justice, and where you gave false police reports, that argument will be treated as the crock of shit it is. Arthur closed his eyes as he listened to her continue. There are 2 reasons that I can think of as to why we are having this talk. Either the charges that you were so gracious to list are not the slam dunk you're portraying them as, or you haven't decided if you should share this information. Opening his eyes, he looked directly at her. And judging by your answer to if I'm under arrest, I'm betting on the second one being true, even if the first one is not. Barbara met his gaze and seemed to be searching for anything she could find in there. After a minute, she finally said, I want you to tell me your story, your entire story, and why you've been doing this. Arthur sank back into his pillow and collected his thoughts, before sitting forward again. You know, or at least can guess, most of it. At least the beginning, that for sure, you've got a solid grip on. My report was almost completely true. I was on a walk, and I was heading home. The alleyway in question is a shortcut along my normal route home. The 4 guys were beating up some kid. I don't know why, but I assume drugs. It's probably drugs. It almost always is drugs. I didn't notice them until I was almost past them. That's when one came up to me and put a knife to my throat and threatened me. My training kicked in, and then less than a minute later, the kid they were wailing on was gone, and I was stabbed pretty deeply a few times, and the 4 men were on the ground. I'm from Freedom City originally, as I'm sure you know from looking me up. And when I retired from fighting, I decided to move back here. I moved into a nice house in a good area that's very vibrant. There's a lot of eateries, there's a lot of evening shows, there's a lot to do in the theater district. There are also 2 eternal complaints in the theater district. 1, rent is too high, and 2, gangs from the Fens are moving in. I can't do anything about the rent, and it doesn't affect me anyway. However, gangs do affect me, and I can do something about those. No offense to you and your profession, but gangs and organized crime here in Freedom is a bit of a problem. Hell, if you doubt that, you should read Desmond Monroe's articles in the Freedom Ledger. It's not that hidden. And so you're doing all of this just out of the goodness of your selfish heart? Barbara asked with a bit of a cocked eyebrow. Oh no, I didn't mean to imply that. I miss the adrenaline rush that comes from a fight. But I only faced gang members for the first couple of fights. I'm sure you do a deep dive into the people I leave behind for you. If you notice, the last few times, they've been people on a drug called Max. And that brings us to here. Last week, I took down a Max dealer, and he told me about a guy named Badger who supposedly supplies all the Max to the city. And supposedly, every Sunday night, Saturday night into Sunday, he comes down to the docks, to where you found me, and he offloads that week's shipment of Max. So I went there to take him down and end Max here in Freedom. I had some vague thoughts about maybe even traveling to LA afterward to try and stop Max, period. As far as I can tell, that's where it originates. It's the only other place it is. This guy, he's almost superhumanly fast, and has some sort of claws where the ends of his fingers should be. He did this. Arthur pulled down his hospital gown, down far enough to expose the upper part of his chest, and the slashes that ran parallel up the entire chest. Or at least, how much of the blood had soaked through the bandages that were covering his chest. Barbara looked for a second, and then she sat back into her chair and wrote a bit in her notebook before closing it with a snap. Abruptly, she stood up and said, "We'll be in touch, Mr. Yell. Please stay in Freedom City for the time being. However, you are not, at this moment, under arrest." Then she walked out the door. Arthur watched her go, and once she left, he collapsed back into his hospital bed, exhausted. This was going to put him out of commission for a bit. Barbara Kane walked out of the hospital room and tried hard not to betray anything that was going on in her head to Arthur. If what he was saying about this Badger guy was true, he just downshifted in her list of open cases. She had been given the case about Max here in Freedom City about a week ago. A lead from that there was a single guy, only a couple of levels up, that was in charge of all the Max distribution in Freedom City, was the best lead she had had in this case. It might even be one of the best leads she's had in her career. It was crazy. Now, of course, there was plenty of reason not to trust Arthur. But he hadn't really lied to her yet. Not understandably. Not a lie that she wouldn't herself have given if she was in his situation. At least not yet. It was hard at this time to gauge her trust in him, but she was willing to give him a bit of rope at the moment. Especially with what she had him on. she could put him away for the rest of his life. But she didn't really want to arrest him at the moment. The Moore Act was bullshit. And so far, he'd only gone after people she would have arrested if she could have been there before he got to them. Hell, he was even willing to help them find a case against these people with what he left by them. The Freedom City Police Department wasn't doing well. Not with what it faced. And here was someone who was helping tip the balance back to where it should be. She got into her car and drove back to the station and rushed to her desk and called over to her partner. "Hey Dave, get over here." She walked over to the 2 corkboards they'd set off to the side and pushed the one for the Pugilist off away and pulled out the almost empty one that they'd had for the Max case. She grabbed an index card and wrote Badger on it in all caps, before pinning it to the top of the board. Dave came over with a raised eyebrow and gestured to the new card. "What gives?" "I've a new CI, and he told me that there's a player called Badger, who's the guy who brings in Max to the city. Supposedly, he was seen dockside this morning. We also have reports that he's an epihuman." Dave kept the incredulous look up. "What evidence do you have for this being true?" Barbara shrugged. "There's some circumstantial evidence. The CI was attacked by something on the docks this morning. That I know for sure. They claim it was from this Badger guy, and that they were at the docks because they were told from a Max dealer. Apparently, once a week, he brings in a load of Max from elsewhere, by boat, which is what we've always thought. It's at least worth checking out. It's a huge lead if it ends up being true, and if it's not, well, it's not like we're wasting any time by taking time to track down this lead over others." What she left unsaid, and that Detective Smith knew far too well, was there weren't any other leads. At least, not yet. Dave shrugged. "I guess you're right. So, where did the CI come from?" "Sorry, Dave," she replied. "I'm not ready to talk to you about the CI yet. I know we share some of our CIs, but we've always kept most of them separate from each other. You've kept yours separate from me, and I've kept mine separate from you. It's better that way. And this CI is going to stay in that ladder camp. This person is someone who I have to keep under wraps. If their identity gets out, a potential well will dry up before we even get a chance to drink from it." He nodded. "Sure thing, Barb. It's a bit rough, but I guess I understand. How long have you been using this one?" "This is the first bit of information I've gotten from this CI. I've been courting them for about 2 months now. We had a breakthrough this morning. I was able to do something that caused them to at least trust me enough. Dealing with the CI and backing up as much of their information as I could from outside sources is how I spent my morning." "Can you trust them?" She shrugged. "I don't know yet. There are a few reasons why I might have reason to distrust them, but so far, I can confirm about half what they've told me about this Badger person. And what little we know about Max here in Freedom seems to indicate that there might be some single person at some top level. That they're only 2 or so levels up from the street level users is crazy. And it's enough that if this is true, if Max is as thin of a layer as the CI is indicating, we could roll it up. We could finish Max here in Freedom. Thank you so much for listening to episode 5 of The Pugilist. Be sure to tune in on March 5th for The Pugilist episode 6, Hornblower. And make sure you tune in tomorrow for a new series.